WebCraftConf.
Good morning, everybody. Okay. All right. So, we're living in a world where information technology is the main driving force. We're also living in a world where your website needs to actually perform less than 3 seconds, or else your user will actually leave. This will eventually affect the retention rate of your website, and also it will affect new customers. Good morning again. My name is Solomon, and I'll be presenting to you performance testing as the missing element in the software development lifecycle. Now, let's get to understand the main ideas mentioned in the video, but also what this presentation is about. The first one we'll be looking at is the business value. What is in it for you, the developer, you, the entrepreneur, or you, the user? Who is the end result? Also, we're going to take a focus on how we did it at Epic Technologies. And also some few testimonials in terms of how the industry is actually using performance testing. And the end goal of it is to actually convince everyone in here that performance testing should be done. But before we get into the meat of the matter, let's do some basic intro. What is performance testing? It's basically testing the system to understand the performance at different loads. How does it work, and what are the different circumstances we need to do that? Now, what are the output? What information do you get from doing performance testing? It tells you what's the speed of your application. It will also tell you how stable your application is at any given point. And can your application scale, and at what point you should actually think about scaling? So the main ones that we normally hear about are basically load test. Load test is used when you're about to launch your application. You actually need to validate before you give your new user base this application. And we all know what could happen in the event of not understanding that circumstance. The other scenario that is ideal is when you want to stress a system, which is the stress testing. At that point, you actually continue to improve the load on the system until it actually breaks. The output for that is to understand at what point your system breaks and what actually is that break in the chain, quote unquote. Another one is scalability testing. You're getting new customers. You want to see at what point you need to add infrastructure or resources. This is the ideal testing for that purpose. So now we understand the different types. When is actually appropriate? Here are a few of my recommendations. Before you're actually doing that product launch, as I've stated earlier, you also need to do it when you're adding that new customer. So you already have existing customers on your system. A new client comes on board. How many users will that client bring? And how will it impact your system? Also, you're doing a major application upgrade. PHP, quote unquote, improved to version 7.0. How is your system going to perform when you actually improve from 5.6? And the one that I'll be highlighting is changing in the infrastructure. What happens when you're moving to an infrastructure? Can you use performance testing to help your system to actually validate concerns and key business indicators? So let's take a look at the first one, which is a business value. Now, what is in it for you as a business owner, as a developer? The two things is visibility and predictability. Visibility in the sense that you'll understand what your application can do now by actually performing these simulations. You'll also understand what your application is capable of doing. Now, let's take a look at how do you share this information going forward. You share this information with your stakeholders by the output, which will actually tell you the capability of your system. It will also improve confidence in the system as you as a developer, you as an entrepreneur. it will also tell you how stable your system is, which comes back down to those three main indicators highlighted earlier. Now, being that the presentation is about performance testing, I'll walk you through a scenario in terms of how we actually use it at Epic Technologies to actually solve a problem. Now, recently, we wanted to change the infrastructure for one of our applications. We actually wanted to decide in terms of what the need for the new resource will be. Now, the objective were clear and simple. We want to become more efficient, and we also want to improve the performance of the system. Now, this is basically a high-level diagram in terms of how our system actually is. Bar the J meter at the top, of course. But it basically has a load balancer and a couple servers, and we also have some databases. So it's basically a typical system. The reason why I added the J meter there is because that's the tool we use to do performance testing. And it is a free open source tool anyone can actually use. So we have to go through our process where we have to get the requirement. We actually went through and understand the setup and executing the process, and also we interpret the results. So I'll be basically walking you guys through these basic steps and what happened throughout the process. Now, the two systems that we were testing is actually a Windows server and a Ubuntu server, right? We wanted to see which one of these systems are more efficient. All things being equal, we wanted to give the systems relatively good specs, quote unquote, because we highlighted earlier there's load balancer, multiple servers, and so forth. You can see that basically both of the systems are still the same. The only difference is the RAM on the Ubuntu server was less than the one on the Windows server. Now, what we did was to execute these tests. And the performance testing allow you to simulate different types of user base, different amount of users in the system that is considered as threads. So this is a basic diagram to actually showing you, to show you that we did roughly 6 minutes of testing with different concurrent users. Now, this system, basically the Windows server, we did it with 15 concurrent users. Also for the Ubuntu, did likewise, and then got curious and did some more testing on the Ubuntu server. Also, that was done for the Windows as well. Now, this is basically a highlight of some of those findings that we have found. The image to your right, well, to my right, is basically the results from the Windows server. The other two are the Ubuntu servers with different concurrent users. So remember the 15 users and the 500 users. Now, this diagram is a basic general idea to highlight that majority of the responses on the Windows server was between that 0.5 seconds and 1.5 seconds. Now, the Ubuntu servers, both of those responses were less than 1 second or less than half a second in both instances. Now, I was curious, so I basically took a look at additional results to see what was happening in terms of the response time for the various pages. Now, upon executing and taking a look at those results, realized that the Windows server, majority of the pages performed within that less than 2 second range. However, there was a lingering page that basically skewed the chart by the average users being over 40 seconds. Now, if you take a look at the Ubuntu server, in both instances, it was less than half a second for all those different scenarios. Was curious again, went on to understand what was actually, how active users were a part of the system. Now, bear in mind that you're testing with 15 concurrent users and 500, but does it mean that they're actually performing activity at any given point in time? Now, what the system does is to do some sort of a sampling. So every time interval, it will try and figure out how many users are actually performing activities at that point in time. And the Windows server, we saw that 3.5 users max was actually performing activities at any given time in the system. Now, while the Ubuntu server was relatively stable, at any given time, the system was actually having one user when the JMeter was doing the sampling process. Now, ultimately, even though I'm an open source advocate, fan of Linux, of course, we actually chose to use Ubuntu servers. Now, that actually gives us enough confidence to actually say, yes, we can supply our currently existing user base with the Ubuntu servers, with less resources, without scaling the system. Now, if it is that my results may be too skewed, or I'm probably too into Linux, so maybe the way how I am looking at the problems is actually maybe a bit different. I basically took a look at a research that was done in terms of how the Ubuntu server, Ubuntu enough of itself in terms of the architecture, how it actually performs. And the Ubuntu server creates multiple threads of Apache server, right? But when it compared to the Windows server, there is one instance of Apache and multiple instances of PHP. So basically, it's not threading. The threading architecture is totally different. Now, let's go into some testimonials in terms of what's happening in the industry. And in this section, I'll call it, when trouble come, shall no blow. And this is a Jamaican proverb, which means that when you're having problems, it doesn't come with any warnings. Basically, they just come at you right there and then. So let's take a look at a few cases in which performance testing could have helped. This case is a Canadian rail company called Via Rail. They actually did a promotion for Canada 150th anniversary celebration, and where they were giving promotions to everyone to actually use a railing service. And basically their site, they actually got so many users using the checkout system, it actually impacted the performance of their system. Next one is the one that we probably are familiar with. It's the Affordable Care Act, and aka Obamacare. In 2013, they actually launched the site. And when they actually launched the site, the amount of users using the system to register online healthcare services actually crashed the system. Now, let's take it a little local, right? There's a popular local streaming service. When it's actually streaming popular services, streaming popular events, they actually experience consistent load. And there are times when they actually notify that they're actually having problems. Is it that performance testing could have helped in that scenario to understand what is the capability of the system? Now, let's take a look at some good cases, right? Case in point, GitHub. Few months ago, they actually got a DDoS attacked, right? Their system did not break. Now, they actually experienced over a terabyte amount of traffic through their network. Imagine our systems getting that. What would happen in that case? Yes, it's a global company, but what's your user base? What is that scenario that you need to account for? Another good case is recently with Microsoft actually taking over GitHub, right? There was a knee-jerk reaction by large amount of the code organizations on GitHub that actually use that source repository. They basically moved their repositories over to GitLab. Now, what happened was that GitLab actually experienced a high amount of traffic during that period of time. Imagine what would happen if it is that their system wasn't prepared for that user load. Everyone would have remembered GitLab is not capable, is not scalable, and might go somewhere else. Now, going back to local once more, what if? This is a sense of what if it is that everyone decides to use the online tax service to pay our taxes at the last minute. And we all know we're Jamaicans. The last minute is when we actually get enough motivation to do something. What if is it that there is a take style out and thousands of users decide to use the online banking system to do their checkout? Can our system perform? Next scenario is, what if there is a major outbreak or for critical services? can those systems actually perform under those loads? Can those systems perform reliably? And what would be the outcome if they don't? Now, my friends, basically, my intention was to let you know that performance testing is the missing element. And quite a few times when we actually talk about the software development life cycle, in the testing section of it, we mention of user acceptance testing, we mention of unit testing, but there's no mention of performance testing. And that is one of the missing elements in the software development life cycle. I wish to say thanks, and please think about performance testing going forward. Finished too early? Okay. Any questions? Well, I suppose they're going to. Okay. So for folks who came in, there's a link that you can actually use to post the questions. So the first question is, when issues in performance testing are detected, should a major infrastructural overhaul be considered? Issues in performance, are detected. Now, depending on what those issues are, if it is that it's code related, if it is that those issues are at different levels of the system, because you can't do performance testing without having a proper coding base or your application is working well. So you have to have unit testing first. You have to have that user flow actually working well. So when you're actually doing performance testing, what it does is try and identify at what point your system break with a large amount of users. So you need that confidence below. So I'm not sure those premise of that question. Next one, does JMeter allow you to script what the concurrent users do when visiting the site? Or is it just visiting a single page? So the brilliance of performance, yes, it actually allows you to script everything. Concurrent users, what's the user flow, and how much delay you want in that process. So it's an extremely configurable open source tool. Now, how it does it is by allowing you to decide the amount of threads, which is in this case the amount of users. It also helps you to identify how do you want to replicate your user scenarios. So you basically have full access and control over your system. Is it that you have 5 users on your system and then maybe there's 10, 20? You can actually configure it to that level. How long do you want those users to perform activities and what's the loop? Do they actually go to another page? What is that flow that you want to achieve? Okay. I think one of the gentlemen.
What other tools apart from JMeter do you use?
Okay, great question. So there are a lot of other tools out there. They're either categorized in the realm of software as a service. So there is BlazeMeter. BlazeMeter is one of those tools that's online. It actually uses JMeter as an underlying technology. There's also other tools such as LoadImpact. LoadImpact is one where, in this agile sense, if you want to quickly test the performance of your website, you basically add a Chrome extension on your browser, navigate the site in terms of what the flow you want to test. It will actually record the scripts. And so you actually load it in the JMeter portal, which is an online service, and they actually perform the test configurable based on what you want. There are some other tools out there, but those are the main ones.
Good afternoon, everybody. So it's often said that pre-optimization is the root of all evil as it relates to software development. In regards to performance testing, how would you balance actually doing optimizations before, which often results in an application that becomes over-engineered and unmaintainable? So at what point, my question is then, at what point in development would you recommend performance testing?
Another great question. So basically, before you actually do performance testing, you should understand your user base, right? Those are all information you'll get when you do those research, as stated earlier. Now, how do you actually know when to actually consider it good? It's based on that user base that you're expecting. If it is that your system is performing acceptably, so what is that standard? Different scenarios. If it's an in-house application, it's different. If it's an online application, it's totally different. Now, once you've understand those different requirements or those different scenarios, the next step is to actually figure out, is your system, is it that you want to scale your system or you just want to achieve that user base? So there are different questions, and the different types of testing will actually help. So in that case, you're just launching, the load testing is ideal. So you don't spend a lot of time doing a lot of testing. You just, when you're about to launch, a 2 day or 3 days before, you run this scenario to say, okay, I'm expecting 40 users, and they're going to do this. Test it with 40 users. Is it okay now, the results that's outputted? Then you actually move on from there. All right?
Hello, Solomon. I'm Delton Phillips, Particular Presence Technologies. A key thing, I like the presentation. A key thing is if when you design your individual components, to design them so that you can do the performance testing on the individual components that you write. So if you know that function A, it takes 1 second to run, and you slam it with 1,000 requests, you can actually do the performance testing on your individual components. And typically, once you know how each of the components perform, you have a pretty good idea how they're going to come together at the end. But typically what happens is that we build stuff that connects to has 10 dependencies, and we don't know which one of the dependencies is actually the slowest one, especially when you have a database or with your biased Ubuntu presentation, you did not configure the Windows box properly. But yes, so that's something to consider.
Great point. Actually, that's a good point you made in terms of that. I forgot to say that, basically we just install the box and we actually execute. It's a good point. Okay, wonderful. So we have a part 2 coming up, right? A good point Delton actually made is that you actually have to, when you're doing your unit testing, that's when you verify your function, each one of your functions, the return time on those. So basically you want to make sure your functions as fast as possible. So once you are comfortable at the unit level, you can actually proceed to do performance testing and have greater confidence in the system and the results. Okay, that's it. All right. Thank you very much.